Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Welcome, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today?
Good. I've got some yard work ahead of me, so I'm staining the deck. And I'm not a huge lover of yard work, Bruce. That may be a surprising fact about me, but there you go. Got to do it, though, every now and then. Every 5 years, you got to stain the deck.
My kid is doing our deck. It's well, I think today is going to be out, judging by that blowing wind and cooler conditions. But he's making progress. So
the world's reopened a little bit, Bruce, and although you may not be able to tell by appearances, I did get my haircut today. So yeah, very nice. By my count, you're still on bad hair day number 0. I did give my head a shave halfway through this thing. It can start to look pretty unruly even when you have a few hairs on your head. Yeah, it's nice that things are opening up. Hopefully, good luck to everyone. Hopefully everything goes well. You're looking good, Bruce. You're is the word hirsute?
Hirsute
yes, as ever. The Burt Reynolds of the Cult of Hockey, Bruce McCurdy, ladies and gentlemen.
I had a haircut and a clean shaven look the week of that everything came apart, because I gave a talk to the astronomy club that Monday, so I was all spruced up for that. And since then, I'm just letting it go to seed. We'll see what happens. If I can't grow a beard at my advanced age, I'm never going to be able to grow one. I think it's starting to kind of spotty for color, but there's no wide open gaps like there used to be in my younger years under.
I think it looks good, actually. Kind of suits you, Bruce. Alrighty, so today we are talking about the NHL Draft. We're talking about whether or not the Oilers should re-sign Mike Smith, and that'll probably be about it. Maybe we could talk about a little bit about Glenn Gullitson's interview with Bob Stauffer. Did you hear that?
I did not.
He talked about the power play. They went into depth on the power play. You should listen to that podcast from Monday, Bob Stauffer's interview with Gullitson, and he kind of went over Gullitson's success on the power play. So let's talk about that a little bit too.
Sure.
Because I did that huge series on it, and all right.
Then you talked to the assistant coach on the penalty kill. So this would be kind of a complimentary interview to the one that you did.
It was, and I'm glad Bob did. It was very interesting. So let's start with Mike Smith. Bruce, yes or no? Should they re-sign Mike Smith?
Well, I went way out on a limb in my post and discussed whether or not I thought the Oilers would re-sign Mike Smith, as opposed to whether I thought they should re-sign Mike Smith. Because in my mind, what Ken Holland and Dave Tippett think is probably a little more germane to what actually happens than to what I think. And I think their marginal odds are that they will re-sign him for reasons given. I put it at 60-40. I put guesses on all the unrestricted free agents as to which ones they'd bring back. And the only ones I had over 50% were Smith, along with Riley Shea, also 60-40, and Tyler Ennis at 80-20. And overriding all of the free agent stuff is the fact that all the uncertainty, all the delays, all the uncertainty of what the market's going to be, when it's going to be, how long it's going to last, that teams will be more inclined to go with internal solutions for 1 year. And I think they already did that with, at the time he was an external solution, Mike Smith, but they wisely went with just a 1-year contract. They didn't go with one of these big long-term deals that if you want to get a top-notch goalie, typically you have to do. And I think Smith largely performed for what he was brought in to do, which is be, a 1 and 1B who could support Mikko Koskinen, who had NHL experience, which Koskinen had 59 games and nobody else in the organization had any as of last July 1st before they signed Mike Smith. And so they brought him in to be a 1B, and he came in and largely, I mean, he split the duties with Koskinen. There's sort of a array of statistical evidence that Koskinen was the better stopper, but there's another bunch of statistics that suggest that the Edmonton Oilers played better hockey when Mike Smith was in net. And you can put into that what you will, and maybe he was just lucky, he played the right games. Maybe there was something about his uh, aggressive puck moving and his aggressive attitude in general that sparked the team. I mean, who the hell knows? Some of this stuff is very much hand wavy uh, in terms of full analysis, but I think a case can be made that the team liked the player and responded to him, and that the coach, who's now had him on 3 different teams, certainly trusted him, and he kept going back to him even during the horrendous slump that he had. And the GM obviously trusted him enough to bring him in the first place and appears to like him. And also, to me, of importance is he and Koskinen had a very good professional relationship between the two of them, which if you're going to go with the 2 goalie system, that's paramount. And so there was aspects to it that worked out. And it certainly was a better arrangement for Edmonton in net than they had in either of the previous 2 seasons, in my view. So I would not be surprised if they go back and say, okay, 1 more year, maybe the similar contract terms. One of the things they did, of course, was they didn't spend a fortune on the guy, and they didn't have a fortune to spend, and they still don't. So their options are limited. They're probably not going to be able to go out and sign Robin Lehner, on the open market. So
Yeah, Bruce, one thing about that, you brought up the uncertainty. How can he
Mhm.
even move? How could anyone move, like set up a house in another city right now? Just think of the hardship of doing that, like changing countries. That's probably going to be possible, but and things could change. But just the whole thing about the freedom of movement is so limited right now, and that's likely to change. But how quickly is that going to change? And in terms of like actually picking up and moving to another city, that's a pretty daunting thought, I think, for most people right now. And I don't expect that would happen. The other uncertainty, of course, is the playoffs. So you're setting the odds, Bruce, without the playoffs happening. And I would actually put the odds of the Oilers just right now at this moment before the playoffs, because we don't know, and that's going to change everything. I'd say the odds are more like maybe as high as 80-20 they would bring Smith back, because he did, it just seemed that Tippett favored him a little bit over Koskinen. Played both goalies about the same, but Mike Smith seemed to be the coach's first choice, I'm guessing, based on just various situations that came up this year where Smith seemed to get a little bit more leeway. I mean, let's face it, he had a horrendous slump. This is what I'm getting at. He had a horrendous slump, absolutely horrendous. Would have driven many goalies right out of the NHL. It was almost 2 months long where he was at I don't know, what was it, 870, 880? Like, it was just a terrible save percentage. But the coach stuck with him. To me, that indicates there's a lot of faith in this player still. As you say, I think it's because of Smith's puck moving, probably, that the team, even though his goalie numbers weren't as good as Koskinen's, the team's winning and other numbers were better, or were as good with Smith and net. And I think his puck moving had a big advantage, had a big impact on that. So, and we brought this up. We were talking about this before the podcast. I remember the Oilers in '91 looked like they were going to win another cup, a second cup in a row. They had gotten through a couple tough series, and they were facing the Minnesota North Stars. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. The Oilers are going to be in the cup final again. It's just the Minnesota North Stars. But that Oilers team, Messier was still on it, and they couldn't get past Minnesota because John Casey was in net for the Stars, and the Oilers. He was such a strong puck mover at that point in his career that he would constantly break down the Oilers' forecheck with very effective passing of the puck. And the Oilers never could mount sustained offensive zone pressure because of it. And Mike Smith does a lot of that. I really think his puck moving is pretty, I don't know if there's a better puck moving goalie in the NHL. And there was two. Remember, there was two early gaffes in the year where he made in the same game two horrible blunders. Did he make another that ended up in the net, Bruce?
Uh, well, I think those were the two worst ones. They were both in the first 10 minutes of the same game against LA Kings, game number 2. And
Is your
the
sound?
other,
Is your mic plugged in? Because it suddenly you suddenly got a lot quieter there.
the Oilers, how's that?
Yeah,
Better?
that's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Oilers did. Fight back and win that game, and Smith himself made a huge game-saving stop in the dying seconds, which was uh, um, uh, an important game. An important game for him, and that disaster happened, and they still had a happy ending to it. So he had. Uh, Other than that, not too many disasters. One thing in the stats that really surprised me by how extreme it was, Smith and Koskinen split the ice time almost 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Smith passed Koskinen in the last game they played. It's like 40 minutes difference over 71 games. And in those games, Koskinen faced an average of 33.3 shots per game. Smith faced an average of 30.2 shots per game. So a difference basically of 10% in shots against. So even though Smith's save percentage was substantially worse than Koskinen's 902 to 917, their goals against averages weren't that different. And meanwhile, in those same games that they played the same amount, the other team scored 9 more goals against Smith than they did against Koskinen, but the Oilers scored 15 more goals. Like, they were more effective as an offensive team. I don't remember what the shots were, but I do know that the goals were better. And I know you can trace a couple of those goals to aggressive, long stretch passes from Smith during line changes, where you can say, okay, their goalie directly contributed to a goal. But in truth, that's very rare that you can say, well, the goalie is, how many of our scoring chances do we credit the goalie? Not very often, right? But you could just say that, the games were a little more wide open, and more things were happening when Smith was playing, and those weren't all bad things that were happening. So it's, the stats are, uh, if you just focus on save percentage, you can say, nope, he's not good enough, get him out of here. But there's no be all and end all single stat, even for a specialized position like
Yeah.
goaltending.
It's interesting, Bruce. I didn't even know their goals against averages, and it shows how out of fashion that
Mm-hmm.
stat is with people like me who look at stats. And we all just look at save percentage now. That's really interesting that their goals against average is so close. But the shots thing really is interesting. And
Yeah.
listen, we intuitively know that he's a better puck mover than Koskinen, right? You just watch the game, and now we have some statistical evidence that backs that up. I think we can just say, hey, there's a pretty good chance here that he was a damn good puck mover, and that helped the Oilers win a little bit more than might otherwise, based on kind of iffy goaltending now and then from him. It was a strength that made up for a bit of a weakness compared to the other goalie actually in net. So good for Mike Smith. And Bruce, I love me some puck moving goaltending. Like, we grew up with Grant Fuhr in net.
I grew up
And,
with Don Smokey McLeod.
me too. And listen, Grant, one of the huge advantages, like, there was a time in Edmonton when the Fuhr Andy Moog debate raged in this city.
Yeah,
Absolutely
sure
was a hot topic. And there was some on Team Fuhr and there was other on Team Moog. And I was on Team Fuhr for a couple of reasons. He was that much more solid, I thought, as a goalie, in particular in pressure games. Some people will scoff at this, but there was no better goalie in the 1980s in a pressure game than Grant Fuhr. And he just was. There was moments as an Oiler fan where you're watching that game, you knew they are not scoring again on Grant Fuhr. They are not scoring again on Grant Fuhr, and they didn't. But another thing with Fuhr was that puck moving. He was so good, so adept, and he was more cautious than Smith. He wasn't quite the rover that Smith is, but he was so calm and so adept at moving that puck. And what was his assists that one year, Bruce?
14 assists. I believe it's still
assists.
the NHL record, and of course 83, 84.
So sometimes the raw save percentages don't capture everything shockingly about it, the worth of a goalie. How about that for a thought?
Yeah.
So yes or no? Will they
Well,
sign? Should they sign Mike Smith?
just
You're not getting off the hook.
one more point on the Smith slump.
Okay.
And I posted a graph showing his save percentage on a rolling 5 game average and showed him basically jumping off a cliff around game number 10 and rebounding around game number 20. And I described the curve as the shape of a profile of a bungee jump. And you look at that in the goal and you go, oh my goodness. But then I posted two similar style of charts of very, very important skaters for the Oilers. Oscar Klefbom, their top defenseman,
Yeah.
Leon Draisaitl, their top forward or top scoring forward in this season. And both of them, I looked at goal differential, 5-on-5 goal differential to cut out all the empty net and shorthanded nonsense that can pollute that statistic. And I just looked at 5-on-5, and the profiles look the same. All of those key players absolutely fell off a cliff sometime in the early to mid November, and they didn't recover until the beginning of January. And can you say, well, the Oilers went in the tank in December because Mike Smith was awful, or can you say because Leon Draisaitl was awful, or because Oscar Klefbom was awful, or maybe they were all awful at the same time and the team couldn't survive? I mean, think about Draisaitl and Klefbom. They're they were playing every game, not every other game, and they were still doing that. So it wasn't all because Mike Smith couldn't make a save when every time they made a mistake. It did seem like that, I have to say, but there was it was more than just Mike Smith that struggled in the first part of December.
Well, that was an
That
excellent
entire
thing to
month.
do. That was excellent, Bruce, to think of
Thank you.
that. And I thought, but you know what? We dig into I think we can answer the question that you just raised. Was it the
Mm-hmm.
goaltending or was it the players or both? We track mistakes on grade A scoring chances against, and I know for sure with Draisaitl, he just started to leak chances against it at this absolutely alarming rate. So this has nothing to do with whether the goalie's making a save or not. This is his individual play in the defensive end, and is he stopping those guys from getting grade A chances or not? And his game and McDavid's game fell apart. I believe Klefbom's game, I know he was up and down this year as well, because players have defensive slumps. So yeah, you had all of these key players who for whatever reason were all slumping at the same time, probably because their schedule was so hectic. Maybe they were all a little bit sick, banged up, hectic schedule, all these things combined. And I mean, that top line needed to be broken up. They just were totally out of sync defensively. And hey, that was an interesting thing. This is an aside. Ken Holland, and I'm going to ask you whether they need to sign Mike Smith or not here.
Yeah, I know you are.
All right. Ken Holland was interviewed recently, and he made an interesting point. One of the things that impressed him, he said, was in that first interview that Dave Tippett gave when he was hired as an Oilers coach. He mentioned the fact that he might be breaking up Draisaitl and McDavid, even though they've been a successful line. Now, for fans like me, that was, well, I thought, of course he's going to break them up. But for Holland, who hasn't been around the Oilers situation very much, he was actually quite impressed that Tippett said that he had kind of the jam to say that he's going to break up these top two players who are doing so well together, because that to him was the mark of a veteran coach, and he said it in that first interview. And when, of course, many of us have argued over the years, and you should break them up. There's fans are probably split right down the middle, would you say, over on that issue, or have been. But anyway, Tippett finally did break them up, and it worked out.
Yeah, well, I envision that interview as Holland immediately responding, but do you think Leon can drive his own line? Seriously, I mean, beginning of January, that was the key move that Tippett made, was splitting them up, and the key move that Holland made was bringing up Yamamoto and Tippett finding the line, and around the same time, by hook or by crook or by maybe waving a magic wand, Mike Smith went from absolutely brutal, the worst goalie in the league, to suddenly more than acceptably good for a long stretch of time. He went. He had an extended. At least 9-game point streak where the Oilers won 7 games and took the other 2 to overtime. And during that time, the whole team recovered from falling out of a playoff position to solidly getting back in one where they've remained. So that was the key turning points of the season were October and January, and in both of those months, Mike Smith was excellent.
He really
And
was.
when they slid, he was not excellent. So I guess you can focus on the fact that he's erratic and consistent. Um, but bottom line, for what they paid for the guy, which at this point is $2 million plus 500,000 in bonuses with some pending for a 1 year deal, I think they at least got what they paid for, and I think they probably will. Like I say, more likely than not, unless there's a trade out there. I really don't want to see the open market things. I don't think there's a solution there, but maybe there's a team that's looking to get rid of a known commodity that they can afford, and they can work something else out. But I think Smith is the favorite to come back for 1 year. The Oilers have now 4 developing goalies. They got 2 in the last year of their entry-level contracts. They have Konovalov in his last year in the KHL potentially, and next summer, well, they'll be in a different position than they are this summer. And by summer, I mean off-season, whatever month it actually happens in. So my expectation, frankly, is they will sign Mike Smith and go with the same tandem that has had success for him this season.
Developing goalies is kind of a kind way to put it, given the season that 3 out of the 4 of those goalies had, including Konovalov. They all took a step back, as far as I can see. Not one of them gave any confidence at all that they're going to be an NHL goalie of those 3. Wells, Skinner, and Konovalov. And then there's Rodrigue, who took a step up. So we'll see.
Why, next playoffs, Rodrigue could be Andy Moog in 1981 for all we know, right? But
well, that's it.
He is promising, but he's the furthest away in terms of just turning pro. So I'm not sure there's any answers there, but I'm not sure that they necessarily want to go long term with a different goalie either. It's a short term decision I think Holland will be making, and the default is just to go back to the guy that they had this year.
Jonathan Willis had a good post yesterday at The Athletic where he talked about how goalies in their 30s, just like all other NHL players, really tend to slide off a cliff. And the best thing to do if you're looking for value in net is to sign one of these AHL veterans who has been there for 4, 5, 6 years in the AHL, been doing really well, and probably should have been in the NHL some time ago, save for the conservative nature of NHL coaches and GMs who like to go with the proven quantity in net. Bob Stauffer suggested yesterday that the Oilers should bring in one of these guys on a $700,000 a year contract, NHL contract, and that could be the solution. Now, I agree. Like I don't want to. I can't spend Daryl Cates' money. Like I don't like if you have unlimited money. If money's not a concern, yeah, sign a third guy who you can send to the minors if needs be. And now they had a player like that in Shane Starrett who looked really close to maybe making it, and his body fell apart last year. He could never get healthy. So I don't know if Shane Starrett's coming back or not. I doubt it, but there are probably 3 or 4 AHL goalies who you could sign as a free agent this year, or trade for limited pieces, and you could have that veteran goalie. And if you're willing, if Cates is able to spend his money, like I'm all for Daryl Cates spending his money to make me happy. Yeah, do that. Bring in that goalie. But Bruce, would you? Okay, here's my question for you, not what the Oilers are going to do. If Smith was offered a similar contract to this year, 1 year deal, similar money, would you okay that? Would you okay making that offer to Mike Smith?
If my GM was recommending it to me, absolutely.
You know what? It's a very hard question to answer.
I know it is.
Because that's why I'm putting you on
I'm
the spot.
all in favor of getting a number 3 this year. I mean, the Oilers are very lucky that that Koskinen and Smith were able to play every game. They had one game where they brought up Skinner to stand on the bench, wear a ball hat. And if one of those veterans were to get hurt for a few weeks, that really would have changed the equation because, well, I mean, as it turned out, the big injury they did get was to their number 3 in Starrett. but he
Yeah.
was a very unproven guy. I frankly like the days back when they had Martin Gerber or Jan Denis down there, or some, an actual Richard Bachman, even, like a proven professional goaltender that was waiting in the wings for that time, during the season that you lost a goalie for a couple of weeks. So I
I
wouldn't mind to
thought
see him get a guy like that.
I liked the bet they made on Starrett, like being that
Hmm.
guy. I mean, he would probably been their most valuable player the year before,
He was good.
and save for injury, he might have gotten some games in Edmonton this year, and we'd all be talking about, the Oilers are well served in net. And
Hmm.
poor Shane Starrett, like I don't know what the future holds for him now, but I don't know if they'll bring him back and take another risk on him because um, there's probably other guys out there who weren't injured, and that's hockey. Okay, Bruce, let's talk NHL draft. Let's start out with the post that I recently did, where I have identified what I call the Big 13. And these are 13 players in this forwards, attacking forwards, who have the offensive talent that would indicate to me that in any other year, most of these 13 players, if they were available in any other year, recent draft, they would go in the top 10, almost all of them, if not all of them. And so I'm basing this on a couple things. First of all, there's 9 players in this year's draft who are coming out of the CHL who average more than 1.4 points per game, and that's a pretty outstanding point total for anyone in the CHL. I'll just go for previous years, and I'll since the turn of the century, and here's the players who have averaged 1.4 points per game: Steve Bernier, who never made it; Bobby Ryan, Max Domi, Josh Bailey, Nikolai Goldobin, Nazem Kadri 1.41, Zach Phillips 1.42, Evander Kane 1.42, Philip Zina 1.42, Claude Giroux 1.43, Alish Hemsky 1.44. This is all in draft years. Nick
Hmm.
Suzuki 1.45, Michael Del Col 1.46, Logan Couture 1.46, Jeff Skinner 1.46, Nico Hischier 1.48, Timo Meyer 1.48. So you get a sense that not all of these players will make it as NHLers, but a lot of them make it, and a lot of them are very, very good players. And almost all those guys were taken in the top 10 in their draft years. A
Right.
few of them were not. Phillips and Goldobin were taken. They were all taken in the first round, those guys. So this year, there's 9 of those players in the draft. Last year, Bruce, there wasn't one from the
Wow.
CHL who had that 1.4 points per game. So usually there's about 3 or 4 from the
Hmm.
CHL. This year again, there's 9. But that's not the only good players from a draft year, of course. There's all the players coming from American leagues, USHL.
Right.
There's the lower Canadian leagues that aren't included in that. And there's, of course, the European leagues. So what I did was to figure out, to try to historically place this draft. How good is this draft for offensive talent going into the draft? I
Hmm.
looked on average, the players who average 1.4 points per game in the CHL are drafted 8th overall in the NHL in the last 20 years. So I kind of took that as a marker. I'll take anyone in the top 10 who's from these other leagues and include them then on the list. And so this is just kind of a back of the envelope thing. It's not as
Right.
precise as maybe it could be, but I just wanted to get a general sense of this. So if you go by that, that's how you get to 13 players from this draft, because you add in players like who are expected to go in the top 10, and that includes, so that's Anton Landell, Tim Stutzy, I don't know how you pronounce his
Hmm.
name, the German who's expected to go in the top 5, Alexander Holtz, and
Lucas Raymond.
Lucas Raymond. So there's 4 more guys you add to your list, you get to 13. So absolutely packed with talent, Bruce. Usually there's about 5 or 6 player forwards who meet this qualification
Hmm.
in a draft year. 5 or 6. Sometimes you get up to 7 or 8. Sometimes you're down to 3 or 4. This year there's
Right.
13 of them.
Wow.
One of them is almost certain to fall to the Oilers. And we are so lucky that in a year when we're going to probably be drafting 20th, a huge need on this team for an attacking forward is going to be met in this year's draft. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. First of all, just a general question to which I don't know the answer. Was there any kind of surge in goal scoring at the junior level this year that was a rising tide that floated some of these boats, or was it just another year? I didn't notice sort of any number of 9-8 games or anything like that, but I don't know if you looked at the league average goal scoring to see if there'd been something, where last year's 1.3 is this year's 1.4, but otherwise, I mean, they've talked about the top of this draft class being very good for a long time. And I mean, I know we saw three guys at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup here in August 2 years ago, who are now all touted as top five, certainly top 10 candidates. And you could see at the time, 16-year-old kids, Alexis Lafreniere, Alexander Holtz, Lucas Raymond, they were all tremendous prospects even then. And they're saying, boy, you got better players for 2020 than we do for 2019. We were saying watching the game. I was watching with Ruel and Supernova, two prospectophiles on the, people might recognize their handles from Twitter. And that the 2020 always looked like to be above average, but 13 top-notch offensive players is a real treasure trove.
To answer your question, Bruce, I think that's that question crossed my mind. It's an important fact check. I couldn't find anything where someone's done that work, and I wasn't quite a tremendous amount of work, so I wasn't about to do it I was digging into this specific question. My gut sense is that if you go back before the lockout in the early 2000s, there's a real dearth of forwards who meet. If you go to the early 2000s, there's hardly any forwards who meet that criteria of 1.4 per game. So what I'm taking from that is that in that era, for those, the 2000 to 2004 draft or 5 draft, that is a factor, that the scoring was lower in the CHL. Now, no one's raised. I was reading a lot about the draft and about this kind of. No one's brought up in recent years. I haven't heard that scoring's up in the CHL this year as compared to other years. And listen, there was not one of these players last year. If scoring was up, did it suddenly rise this year? I kind of doubt that. So there was none of these players last year who met this qualification. But I think in the early, so like in the 2000 draft, there wasn't any players who made it. 2001, there was just 2, Jason Spezza and Ales Hemsky. 2002, there was just 2. 2003, there was just 2. 2005, there was just 2. 2006, there was just 2. And then it's 2007 on, it takes off the scoring. So I do think that in those early years, that might have been the case.
I do have the averages in front of me for the NHL over those years, which of course is not junior, but it is it is the litmus test for hockey as a whole. And it was right around 2.6 to 2.7 goals per game from 2000 to 2004. And since then, it's gradually risen up to where it's now just over 3. So basically a 10% increase in goals from the beginning of the century to the current day. So obviously that's going to turn a former 1.3 points per game player into a 1.45 or something today. And should just produce more players who have crossed that threshold. But not
so they're
9.
yeah, exactly. Like, so this is, I think we can safely say, like, you're not going to jump from 2 to 9 if you have that increase in scoring. You'll have some increase in scoring. Generally speaking, in the weaker draft years, you'll have players who average less than a point per game going in the top 10. Now, some of those players who average less than a point per game, to me, that would be, you better be damn sure he's this beast before you draft him. But some of these players who average less than a point a game are these beasts, like Bo Horvat. They turn into these fantastic NHL hockey players. But to me, it's a bit of a red. That is one red flag. If the scoring isn't high, you're really rolling the dice if you think that you're going to get a top 6 NHL forward out of a player who's averaging less than a point per game in major junior. It does happen, and this would be an interesting study probably. Look at all the ones who have averaged less than a point per game in the last 15 years since scoring's been more even, and see how many of those players have turned into top 6 forwards in the NHL. And it happens, but it's pretty rare.
They mostly be complementary players, would be my guess.
Yeah. So I don't know which one it's going to be, Bruce, of these players who fall to the Oilers. But man, I should add one final qualifier. I didn't look at players taken outside the first round who have averaged 1.4 per game, because I was just trying to look at heading into a draft.
Okay.
What is the expectation for that draft? And I wasn't looking at like historic achievement of players from a draft. Like if you looked at the historic achievement from players from drafts, like you could say, well, the 2003 draft, for instance, just pulling a number out of the air, is actually the best draft because it had like 20 forwards who went on to score, a point per game in the NHL. But I wasn't looking at that. I was trying to look at heading into the draft in terms of the expectation based on point scoring in junior hockey. How does the talent level look? And so right now we're in a very, very optimistic moment for Oiler fans. And all we need is for a couple teams to draft defensemen and one goalie. And we're in the money in terms of getting a player with tremendous top 10 draft pick offensive potential at the 20th spot. So,
well, I guess, I mean, that's certainly the glass half full thing. The glass half empty version is that all the other teams ahead of us are going to be getting good players too, right? So, I mean, it's just a good year, but we want to be part of that. What you don't want is the 2003 scenario where you have division rival Anaheim loading up with Ryan Getzlaf and Corey Perry while the Oilers are trading down and out into Mark Pouliot, where everybody else gets a good player and you don't. Like, that's a disaster. So they certainly need to make this pick count.
They've done pretty well with their recent picks.
Yes,
you could argue the Jesse Puljujarvi pick was a major miss. I'd say the story's still somewhat unwritten on Jesse Puljujarvi, that it's still, we're not past that 5-year mark, for instance, with Puljujarvi, are we? We're getting there.
No.
So it's this year actually will be the
2021 will be, yeah, he was drafted in 2016.
So this is we'll see what Puljujarvi does this year for whatever team he's with, but other than that, the Oilers have done pretty well in recent years. I mean, a run of picks that includes Draisaitl, Nurse, Yamamoto in the first round. Bouchard looks like he's going to be story's not told, but he was damn good in the HL last year. So I'm hopeful the Oilers have some strong drafters in place. Certainly, Bruce, in the 2000 the Prendergast era, all due respect, was not marked with drafting brilliance for the Edmonton Oilers. Neither were the last 10 years of the Barry Fraser. Last 15 years of the Barry Fraser regime were not at all good. So we'll see. Well, this is a new era.
Yeah, right. And I'm taking a slightly different angle and looking at what happens around pick number 20. And I'm just looking at players picked exactly at number 20 in recent drafts. And since the flaming bust that was Angelo Esposito in 2007, a lot of NHL players get picked. Michael Del Zotto, 2008. Jacob Josephson, 2009, marginal. Bo Bennett, 2010, kind of marginal. Connor Murphy's been a defenseman in this league for a long time. Scott Laughlin was, again, not a great player, but an NHLer. And then from 2013 to 17, it's a pretty impressive list. Anthony Mantha from Ken Holland's Detroit Red Wings. Nick Schmaltz, who's a very good player for Arizona. Joel Eriksson Ek in Minnesota. Dennis Schlowski in Detroit. Jury's still out on him. 2017, Robert Thomas, a very good scoring forward for St. Louis Blues. And then since then, of course, the guys are just starting to turn into the pro ranks. And over that same period of time, the Oilers, if you go sort of plus or minus 2 from 20, because it's not often you land exactly on a given number.
Yeah.
But in 2007, the Oilers took oh, what the heck's his name?
Jordan
The
Everly.
the checking forward they wound up trading out to Hartford.
Oh, Riley
To
Nash.
Riley Nash, yeah, and he's played like 500 NHL games, and then in 2008 they picked they took him at 21. They took Jordan Eberle at 22 in 2008. That's a home run. They took Oscar Klefbom at number 19 in 2011. That's a home run. And in 2017, they again picked at number 22 and took Kyler Yamamoto. And that ball has come flying off the bat and it appears headed for the fences as well. So around that spot, the Oilers have done well. Where they've stunk is picking early in the second round, where they just had just a string of disasters. But when they've had a pick around number 20, they've made it count. So for whatever that means, I mean, we're talking about different GMs, different scouting staffs, ancient history in some cases, but uh, it's at least encouraging if you look back and see, well, they got actual guys that came, made the team, made the league, became good players in this league, drafted from right around that position. Hopefully, they can do it again.
Yeah, maybe you should increase your sample size for NHL players, like go from 18 to like the
Yeah,
18 to
yeah.
22
This is very preliminary. I'm just
to give like a even bigger picture, and you can then kind of more accurately figure out the odds of
yeah,
this player turning into a good NHL. You can just look at the forwards, for instance, because we know they're gonna take a
right.
forward.
Yeah,
So just look at the
100%.
forwards taken like for that time period from 18 to 22, and then
Hmm.
we can start to get a real sense of over time. But again, this draft, all drafts are not like other drafts. Some
Hmm.
years into this world are born, more players that are going to be great NHLers than other years. It's just how it works. And
Right,
um,
100%.
and this looks like one of those years. And so I'm just very hopeful. And of course I have the Everly and the Yamamoto picks firmly in my mind. But
Sure.
irrationally bubbling up into my head like, oh, we're gonna get an Everly or a Yamamoto this year, and that's what I think. So I'm probably wrong, and we're just as likely to get a Pouliot or a Ninamaki. We're likely to get Ninamaki'd in this draft, as we are as. But listen, this really is rare to have this amount of abundant offensive talent. Like this, it's just fantastic, and that's not even including some players like that Sean Patrick Ryan identified, like Jan
Right.
Misak and Tyson Forster, I believe the other guy was. He's got this blistering slap shot. So yeah, I wish the Oilers had two draft picks in the 20s. This is a year to have. This is a good year, very good year to have a draft pick, extra draft picks. New Jersey has 3 picks in the top 20. So I think New Jersey isn't going to spend them all on forwards. I think that's one of the teams. So one of the things I'm doing, Bruce, is looking at, okay, we need like 4 teams to take a defenseman and 1 team to take a goalie. And Askarov is rated in the top 10 by almost everybody. So he's probably going to go. So,
Yeah.
but we need some teams to take some defensemen. And there are some really good
You can
defensemen,
count on it.
but not that many. But their team need drives a lot of this, and if there's going to be some teams that are going to need a defenseman right now more than they are forward. So what I think we should do is get together and do a mock draft. We haven't done that before, but it might be fun for us, like the 3 of us. We could even do it
Hmm.
live, or not live, but we could do it on a podcast where the 3 of us get together. Each of
Hmm.
us takes 10 teams, like the drafting teams in the first round,
Right.
and we draft for that team. And
Okay.
do that. I think that might be a lot of fun, and we could write a post about that. Alrighty. What do you? What? Oh yeah. So that's what you're working on,
Yep. You
and
bet.
let's deal with the final topic of the day, which is Bob Stauffer had an interview with Glenn Gulutzan,
Hmm.
Glenn Gulutzan, about the Oilers' power play, and this was a topic that I got into deeply earlier in the year. I did it earlier in this lockdown. We've had the lockout, now we've got the lockdown. Lockdown period where I looked at the Oilers' power play and I came to a few conclusions. That the key to the Oilers' power play success was a few things. It was freeing up McDavid, especially to have free movement, free range on the power play, taking fewer outside shots from the point, not focusing
Hmm.
so much on Clefbaum, and having the top players shoot from their key spots. And I'm happy to report that in Gullitson's interview with Bob Stauffer, he identified all of those three things as being as actually having happened and actually being keys to the Oilers' power play success, which lends to my theory. It's actually fairly easy or not that difficult for the average fan to look at a power play and figure out what's going right and wrong. But for a PK, it's almost impossible because of
Yeah.
the nature of hockey. So Gullitson didn't actually say anything that was that surprising, but he did back up what he said was completely in line with what I had found in my own posts, I thought. Do you have some cat or dog issues there?
I have a visiting cat. I have a visiting cat. We have cats in our basement. So I don't often, because our cat died, of course. So I don't often get.
Is that a big? That looks like a big cat. Whoa.
That is a very
That cat.
large.
It's almost. If that cat was any larger, Bruce, he'd be making a breakfast of you right now.
Can you hear him purring?
I can. Seems like a nice purr cat. Yes.
Yeah, he's a great big purr ball. Anyway.
Yeah. So I was saying Gullitson basically confirmed the things I had found in the tendencies that I had noticed myself.
Yeah. Well, that's we talked. I think we can actually claim credit for this because I think maybe 2 years ago we talked on a podcast about the need to untether, I think was maybe the word I used, McDavid from the half wall, sort of the modern traditional NHL power play. You know, the template of you put your top guy on the half wall and have him feeding the other players, and you have your best playmaker doing that. Well, that Connor McDavid may be your best playmaker, but that's not necessarily his best play. And taking, I mean, his feet are his giant weapon, and they really did. They did remove that tether and say skate, make stuff happen. And of course, having Draisaitl as a plan B to operate that half wall, which he did brilliantly in Prince Albert, and I mean, he's certainly he's got the chops to do it. And I think even Draisaitl moved around the zone a little bit. And I think they just created so many different looks for the other teams with so many talented players, both giving and receiving passes out of those various looks that, their chances of generating a high quality shot on a power play was pretty high. And the chance of that high quality shot hitting the net was pretty high. And what you found that I found, I think, most intriguing out of all your posts on the power play was that difference in how who was making the shots and how it changed from funneling pucks at the net from the point, from the Todd McClellan, Jay Woodcroft era, to no, let's move the puck around until we get the shot we want from the guy we want shooting it and take that shot. And the shot numbers going down, the goal numbers going way up. And that was key. And it sounds like what Gulitson said yesterday corroborated the major points of that.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of the Jay Woodcroft power play in Bakersfield the last 2 years either. I don't know. It just seems like it. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it. He's otherwise a very good. He's got many strengths as a coach, Jay Woodcroft, but I've never been a fan of his power play strategy. Gulitson mentioned Ryan Nugent-Hopkins being as good as McDavid and Draisaitl in the offensive end. So just when the puck's in the offensive end on the power play, he put Nuge in the same category as those other two guys, which I think is a fair comment. He talked about Nuge's ability to get that shot, even though he's not on his off wing, to get off that great shot and to set up plays. And I think Draisaitl's a better player in the offensive zone, just in the offensive zone, not overall, just in this limited thing on the power play in the offensive end. Draisaitl is a better player than Connor McDavid in that particular aspect of the game. But when you do unleash McDavid, and you could call this power play as much as anything Connor McDavid unleashed. Yeah. That's a huge thing. And you're right, Bruce. We had been hammering on that because it was just so abundantly apparent that having him on the right half wall was not working. that he wasn't getting shots off, he wasn't getting passes through, he was giving away the puck, and it was painful to behold that year. I think that must
Oh,
have been
2017-18 when the
18, and it
Oilers
was
got
just
they had
painful to watch that power play.
31 power play goals in the entire season.
And Milan Lucic in front of the net. Oh God, like he wasn't retrieving pucks. He wasn't in that. They just wouldn't change up their strategy. They wouldn't adapt. And
Mhm.
I guess that's when I developed my distrust of Jay Woodcroft's power play tactics. But maybe it's easier to notice problems than to fix them. How about that for a theory that
Yeah.
maybe Jay Woodcroft was well aware of the issues, but for various reasons. Like, it's hard to take Milan Lucic off the power play, I'm sure, right? Like, to say, no, you're sitting, you're not gonna. We've paid you $6 million a year for 7 years or whatever the hell it was, but no, and even after you've had tremendous success recently on the power play, you're just not getting it done, buddy. You're gonna have to sit. So it just went with that forever. That cat's mauling you, Bruce. He's
Yeah, well, I'm all in him too.
all right. Let's leave it there. I don't think we've covered the topics.
All right. Sounds
Thanks
good.
for talking, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast. Why can't I? There we go.